The first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. Just a few weeks ago in my classroom, a couple of students were talking about an altercation that occurred in the bathroom. I inquired a little bit more detail about this event, and one of my students turned to me and said, Mr. Wilkes, the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. It's highly unlikely that either of these students that were talking to me have ever read the book. Perhaps they have seen the film, but almost everybody has some familiarity with either the film or the book going into it. I didn't remember much about Fight Club. I think I watched the movie when I was in high school, and I recalled some of the scenes from the film. I obviously remembered a very handsome Brad Pitt, a disheveled Edward Norton, and some of the gruesome scenes in that film and its sepia tone darkness. But about a month ago, I am a subscriber to the Soft White Underbelly channel, and Chuck Palahniuk was a guest on the show, and it was one of the most interesting interviews I'd ever watched. And Chuck Palahniuk in the interview talks about primarily the same thing that is focused on in the Soft Underbelly channel, which is the ribald stories that people often tell. And in this interview, he talks about how these dark, embarrassing stories can help us to heal. Now, I don't know that much about Chuck Palahniuk's background. I listened to a couple other book reviews and I read a little bit and watched a little bit. And apparently he had a really dark upbringing, which involved, I believe, his grandfather attempting to kill his father. And so it's no surprise that Chuck Palahniuk writes really dark stories and that Fight Club itself is unbelievably dark, and that Chuck Palahniuk even finds a kind of liberation in telling these stories that reveal the most secret and dark aspects of who we are. So everybody knows the story. Everyone knows the name Tyler Durden, right? But let's do a brief summary anyhow. So the story starts off with an unnamed protagonist who is working a white-collar job as a product recall specialist. And he is made to decide using a very simple A, B, C, X formula whether or not to recall products that may result in the death of thousands of customers. Working this job is miserable and empty and leads the protagonist to suffer from severe insomnia. And he goes to the doctor, and the doctor tells him that he should go sit in with a group of men who are suffering from testicular cancer, so he can find out what real suffering is like. He goes to find out what real suffering is like, and it cures his insomnia. However, in one of these church basement suffering gatherings, the main character meets Marla Singer, who is also attending these meetings for similar reasons. And he realizes that he is a fake, a phony, and the meetings no longer serve to cure his insomnia. Shortly after this, on a beach, the main character meets Tyler Durden, the famous, handsome Brad Pitt, disheveled, spiky, gelled, red leather jacket character from the film. He meets Tyler Durden on a beach, and Tyler is making a bonfire or like wooden shape thing into a fist, and he is sitting in the shadow of this fist so that he is cradled as if upon some kind of violent lotus. And it is at this moment that Tyler Durden becomes the main character's life guru and teaches him how to properly suffer. We get to know Tyler. Tyler works two jobs. One of these jobs is working in a movie theater where he transitions reels of films. And for his personal enjoyment, he splices clips of pornography into family films. Also, he works as a waiter at various five-star hotel restaurants where he delivers various human fluids into expensive dishes for the rich. One night, Tyler and the main character are at a bar, and Tyler challenges the still unnamed protagonist to punch him as hard as he can, which he does. And at this moment, both characters realize the temporary ecstasy provided by pain. The now two characters decide to start a fight club, and it instantly becomes popular. In these fight clubs, which take place in the basement of bars, local men gather to beat the living crap out of one another. And they follow just a series of rules like no shirt and no shoes. And if it's your first fight club, you have to fight. And there's a safe word, stuff like that. This all devolves into a controlled chaos that turns into Project Mayhem, which is funded by Tyler taking the liposuction fat out of the local liposuction clinic waste dump, mixing it with lye, and turning it into expensive soap. So as he states in the novel, he takes the fat of rich women and sells it back to them at a significant price increase. Project Mayhem starts off as a series of small pranks, but quickly turns into a plan of total societal collapse. If you haven't seen the film or read the book, I'll leave it there. Go watch it. Go read it. You probably already saw it. Okay, so that's an interesting story. It's really dark. It was really unsettling to read. I was kind of going through some dark stuff myself at the time while reading it, and it definitely didn't help at all. So I think the afterword is one of the most illuminating aspects of this story. So I'm just going to turn there and work through the afterword a little bit because it helps me to work through some of my thoughts about the book. All right. So in the afterword, Chuck Palahniuk talks about how the book is really popular. He meets some kind of a cowboy at a place called the Haunted Tunnel. And this cowboy comes up to him and tells him the second rule of the Haunted Tunnel tour is to not talk about the Haunted Tunnel tour. And Chuck Palahniuk says something like, "Oh yeah, I wrote that book." And the cowboy in the Haunted Tunnel says, "What book?" He notes how Donatello Versace, quote, sewed razor blades into men's clothing and called it the Fight Club look. He talks about the band Limp Bizkit and how they bannered their website with Dr. Tyler Durden recommends a healthy dose of Limp Bizkit. And he goes on for a number of pages and recognizes how saturated the culture has become with Fight Club. Also, he goes into something of a criticism of those who have attempted to analyze the book's themes. Despite the book's popularity and the film's popularity in the culture, Chuck Palahniuk says that the Fight Club itself doesn't really matter. He says, the whole idea of Fight Club wasn't important. It was arbitrary, but the 8 rules had to apply to something, so why not a club where you could ask someone to fight? He says it could have been a barn raising club or a golf club or something non-threatening. But he also says, like, there were a lot of books coming out at the time about women gathering together, like the Joy Luck Club and the Divine Secrets of the Ya-Ya Sisterhood. However, there was nothing about this new social model for men to share their lives. And so Chuck Palahniuk just kind of arbitrarily decided a fight club. In the afterword, he then goes on to talk about how this story really is just a reflection of human beings and nothing really all that extreme. He says, every party I attended gave me more material. There's a story about Mike splicing porno films into family movies. There's a story about Jeff pissing in a soup as a banquet waiter. So he's saying that, like, this story isn't really a satire. It's not an exaggeration of the darkest aspects of human beings, but rather it's just a kind of retelling of what people normally do. It was a classic, he writes. ancient romance, but updated to compete with the espresso machine and ESPN. All right, so I don't buy any of this. I think it's garbage. Chuck Palahniuk wrote about Fight Club for a number of reasons. He claims that the story was apostolic, or like the story of an apostle, like in Great Gatsby, when Nick Carraway has survived the downfall of Jay Gatsby's fortune and Daisy Miller's retreat into a cold heartlessness. However, I don't think it's that simple. I don't think this book is just a romance, and I don't think it's just a story as old as time. I think it's about things that are way more specific than that. So let's take a look at what I think this book is really about. This is a story about modern office work and dehumanization. It's something more like Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis than it is a Greek romance. This is a story that answers the questions of meaning by exploring the darkest aspects of the human psyche and human behavior. Funerals are nothing compared to this, Marla says. Funerals are all abstract ceremony. Here, you have a real experience of death. This is a story about the emptiness of consumerism. We all have the same Januszów armchair in the Stein green stripe pattern. Mine fell 15 stories burning into a fountain. We all have the same Rislampa Har paper lamps made from wire and environmentally friendly, unbleached paper. Mine are confetti. All that sitting in the bathroom. The all cutlery service, stainless steel, dishwasher safe, the Vild hall clock made of galvanized steel. Oh, I had to have that. And the Clisp shelving unit. Oh yeah. This is a story filled with gruesome, esoteric trivia. You can swallow a pint of blood before you're sick. This is a story about finding meaning in suffering and self-destruction. It used to be enough that when I came home angry and knowing that my life wasn't towing my 5-year plan, I could clean my condominium or detail my car. Someday, I'd be dead without a scar, and there would be a really nice condo and a car. Really, really nice until the dust settled, or the next owner. Nothing is static. Even the Mona Lisa is falling apart. Since Fight Club, I can wiggle half the teeth in my jaw. Maybe self-improvement isn't the answer. Tyler never knew his father. Maybe self-destruction is the answer. Oh yeah, it's also a book about fatherless men. This is a story that mocks new agey self-help nonsense and responds to it with violence. Picture your gut chakra opening in a slow motion explosion of sausage casing small intestine. If it is a romance, it is certainly competing with the espresso machine. The color of Marla's brown eyes is like an animal that's been heated in a furnace and dropped into cold water. This is a story of revenge against the emptiness of modern life. What Tyler says about being the crap and the slaves of history, that's how I felt. I wanted to destroy everything beautiful I'd never have. Burn the Amazon rainforest. Pump chlorofluorocarbons straight up to gobble the ozone. Open the dump valves on super tankers and uncap offshore oil wells. I wanted to kill all the fish I couldn't afford to eat and smother the French beaches I'd never see. I wanted the whole world to hit bottom. Pounding that kit, I really wanted to put a bullet between the eyes of every endangered panda that wouldn't screw to save its species, and every whale or dolphin that gave up and ran itself aground. And most of all, it's a story about emptiness. You have a class of young, strong men and women, and they want to give their lives to something. Advertising has these people chasing cars and clothes they don't need. Generations have been working in jobs they hate just so they can buy what they don't really need. Okay, so that's a lot. But I think what's really going on here is that this is a book that finds the author very uncomfortable with modern life. Modern life can be empty, and dead end, white collar office jobs where your work on spreadsheets can result in the deaths of thousands can be unbelievably dehumanizing. However, as many critics have noted, this is something of a nihilistic book. It doesn't offer any solutions. And if it does offer any solutions, it's simply found in self-destruction and violence. With all that being said, Chuck Palahniuk seems like a really, really nice guy, an impressively nice guy. And I would highly recommend that you watch the interview on Soft White Underbelly because his character totally belies what I found in this book. Okay, so is it good literature? Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Chuck Palahniuk talked about in the Soft White Underbelly interview how he was inspired by songs and inspired by films, that they were quick. They didn't take their time. There were no long purple passages. Rather, they cut from scene to scene, and it was up for the reader or the viewer or the listener to put the pieces together. And in this book, that's what Palahniuk does. They are chapters like pieces of shattered glass, but large pieces of shattered glass that could easily be put back together by any 15 or 16-year-old. It's also worth noting that he calls his own style minimalism. It's certainly that. The sentences are short, the word choice is sharp and incisive, and I like it. The narrative is not very postmodern though. It's pretty linear from front to back. Chuck Palahniuk writes about not losing the reader. I don't see any way a reader could really get lost. This is like a really short book, and I didn't find myself ever getting close to lost. The only writer I thought of, I guess there's a guy named Bret Easton Ellis, the guy who wrote, American Psycho. I haven't read Bret Easton Ellis, but I have read Kurt Vonnegut. And Chuck Palahniuk reminds me a lot of Kurt Vonnegut in that the characters, they're not very real. It's like Billy Pilgrim in Slaughterhouse-Five. There's no one in World War II walking around with golden boots and then lying in his bed and time traveling and spending time in an alien zoo. It's just not going on. However, he uses these extreme, unreal characters to say something real about the world. That's cool. So I thought this was really dark. I watched this with my girlfriend, the movie, after I read the book, and she said you couldn't pay me to watch that again. That was very dark. I kind of agree, though I know after reading the afterword that Palahniuk would tell me that I would prefer a book club or a watercolor club or a hiking club. And in truth, I probably would. So this is a pretty good book. I think that everybody should probably read it. However, it wasn't really for me. All right. Thanks for listening.